All right, we are live. Awesome. Welcome everybody to Bass Players for Black Composers workshop with Michael Martin, double bassist, pronouns he, him, his, and Sophia Bass, pronouns she, her. I'm Rebecca, pronouns she, they, live streaming from Los Angeles. If you're new to Bass Players for Black Composers, we are a nonprofit organization focused on commissioning and amplifying and sharing new compositions for double bass by Black composers. So we're really, really excited about this collaboration. Between Sophia and Michael. So Sophia Bass has been given the monikers Wunderkind and bold composer by her mentor, Hollywood film composer Roger Neal. Sophia Bass aspires to establish a career with international scope as a film and television composer and educator. With an ethnomusicology background that informs her creative work, she believes that having a breadth of knowledge across cultures is the key to developing her artistic sensibility, which in turn will enable her to compose for any story in any context and to reflect the sonic wealth of the world in her music. Um, for this collaboration, Sophia wrote a composition for bassist Michael Martin. Michael Martin is a second-year double bass fellow in the New World Symphony from Allentown, Pennsylvania. Formerly, he was a diversity fellow with the Cincinnati Symphony and an associate member of the Civic Orchestra of Chicago. He holds degrees from Northwestern University and Oberlin Conservatory of Music in double bass performance. Michael lives in Miami Beach, Florida, with his girlfriend Rose, their tuxedo cat Tofu, and an ever-growing collection of houseplants. Michael began his study of the double bass with Suzuki teacher Dominic Fiore in early high school and quickly discovered a deep love of the double bass in all its musical capacities. He has studied with renowned bass professors Tracy Rowell, Andrew Rossetti, Owen Lee, and Alexander Hanna. Throughout his undergraduate and graduate degrees, Michael developed a passion for string pedagogy and has taught private and group lessons at the Cleveland Institute of Music Preparatory Program, as well as lessons and ensemble coachings at Cleveland Heights High School. As part of his graduate degree, he studied string pedagogy with the legendary cello pedagogues Hans-Jorgen Jensen and Cornelia Watkins Dyer. In addition to orchestral playing, Michael found an appreciation of contemporary music in his time at Oberlin Conservatory and can be heard on the album Song Tree, performing the music of Ricardo Zahn Muldoon alongside faculty of the Easton School. Michael is also the subject of an episode of the Slate podcast How To by Charles Duhigg on peak performance. He is also a creator of Black Reflections, a 3-part panel discussion series on racial justice in music, featuring Black luminaries of classical music and jazz such as Chichu Nonoku, Christian McBride, and Dr. Tammy Kernodle. Michael plays a modern instrument made for him in 2019 by Christopher Savino and a bow by acclaimed Utah bow maker John Robert Dow. So welcome, Sophia, and welcome, Michael. We're so happy to have you here. We're going to move in a second to sharing the workshop that you guys did. Before we dive in, is there anything else you guys want to add?
I just want to say that it's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you.
Yes, I'll second that gladly. Yeah, it's been such a pleasure, like working for bass players for Black composers and working with Sophia. So
Awesome. So we'll go ahead and move to the workshop and keep your questions in mind for our Q&A afterwards. Thank you.
So good to see you too. Long time no see.
yeah, it's been a while.
Yeah, how have you been?
I'm good. I'm here at Miami Beach, in the New World Symphony, just
Awesome.
getting ready for some auditions in the fall, that kind of stuff, and for our season next year. So
That's really awesome.
what do you do?
Well, I'm currently in the Chicago suburbs. I've been here for the past year.
And I've been involved in a couple projects. One independent one involving a 22-minute soundtrack that I had recorded last year with members of the Oberlin Orchestra. So I was just finishing that up, and I recently finished a New York commission for a cellist in Bolsegev for her latest album. And then I'm doing this. So I've been keeping myself busy.
Yeah. Where, what suburb of Chicago?
West Chicago.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I did my master's degree at Northwestern.
That's awesome.
Very
Yeah.
familiar with the area. And actually, when our season here like stopped last year in March, my girlfriend and I, we flew back to stay in Evanston. Actually.
Oh yeah, that's very close.
Yeah. So.
That's awesome. Well, how did you feel about the piece?
It's really cool. It's a lot of fun. It's very freeing, you know, to be able to play a piece of music like this and to not like, I don't know, maybe I have this wrong, but just in the way that I've been preparing it and playing it, like it doesn't feel I've been preparing for the Cleveland Orchestra audition, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is like tons of orchestra excerpts, you know, and like find the granular details to everything, and like if you miss any of them, that's not the piece, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been freeing to work on a piece of music that it feels like it values like your individual voice as a performer, and it's less about you know, like checking boxes. So it's been a very nice reprieve and a big contrast from what I've been working on. So
that's very good, because when I approached this work, as you can see in the composer's note, I wanted to write something that was both improvisatory. It felt improvisatory, yet thoughtful, because I wanted the performer to bring their own voice to the piece. So the music itself acts like a skeleton that you have the freedom to fill out in your own way. So I'm glad that it's very freeing for you.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, let's take a listen.
Sure. Do you want me to play it with the drone or?
Sure. Yeah, that would be great. rendered.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome. Wow. I'm curious, how do you feel, because it sounded really good bowed, how do you feel playing it hits? Would that
Like,
be a lot?
like in the recording that you said?
Yeah.
I could
Mhm.
give it a shot, yeah.
Do you want to try it?
Something that happens all the time in a lot of contemporary scores that I've played is a composer will write pits at some part,
Mm-hmm.
and then they like forget to write arco. So
Oh,
I
yeah.
just assumed that that you wanted to arco except the beginning, but I'll give it a shot. Pits. Let's try it.
Yeah, let's just give it a shot. I can write sempre pits next time.
In that case, I might stand if I do this.
Yeah, whatever's comfortable for you.
Okay. How does it sound? I might need to move the mic closer to be able to hear all of this.
Yeah, perfect. I was actually gonna stop you there to see for the grace notes, for example, like sa re ma pa ni sa ni. So for the downbeat of measure 8, the you don't necessarily have to pluck every grace note. You can pluck the first grace note and almost bend the note. Yeah, like that. So instead of it being 3 distinct plucks, it's just one bent note, if that makes sense.
Yep, that makes sense.
And feel free to do that with all of the grace notes.
Okay. Maybe I could, sorry, let me rearrange myself a little bit.
Take your time.
I'll just start on the second line and just tell me if this is closer to what you're thinking of.
Okay. That sounds really good.
Okay, so you can hear the slides. Okay,
Mhm.
Okay, good.
So in the last quarter note of measure 7. So I heard the slide in the that sounded really good. And that's why I had noted in the beginning of the score the reason why it's a meend. In Indian classical music, it's not just a grace note, because a grace note denotes 2 separate notes, 2 plucks. In Indian classical music, a meend is the parent note, but bent from either the top or the bottom. So it shouldn't be seen as 2 distinct things, but one parent note that's sometimes bent. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So with the grace notes that are adjacent to the parent notes, you can bend them, but I understand with, for example, the downbeat of measure 8, me. Technically speaking, you might have to do multiple plucks on that one, but when you can do one gesture instead of 2 distinct gestures with a grace note, you're free to do that.
Okay, I can do that. I'll just need to keep the reason this is really popular on electric bass to do these sort of gestures. I guess the only reason why it doesn't always translate as well to double bass is just because it's harder to hear unamplified. But I mean, I have a microphone. It's not like, I'm not just playing for a live audience, so you can hear that. So I mean, I
can hear that very well.
I can do that. Sure.
Awesome. So how do you feel about the rest of the piece doing it in pizzicato?
I don't think it's a problem at all. I think then the range of everything works very well. I don't have any register issues. I wanted to bring up the last bit, especially bowed. I would want it to be up an octave, but I think it makes more sense pits, because like the pits double bass, like I feel like the most resonant range for the instrument is like, in the lower positions, really, all throughout here. So I think it makes more sense to just keep it all as written.
Okay, do you want to try that in pits?
Sure.
And this is measure what? Where are you starting from?
70.
You were talking about the end?
Yeah, like 77, 78.
Sure.
Sorry, is this one, are these, so when you have like an 8th note and then you have the like slur, is that, or is it like a hammer on or like a pull off or a slide?
That would be a pull off. So 76, 77, 78. So in measure 78, the 3rd quarter note, that wouldn't be a slide. So the slur denotes 2 distinct plucks. I should have clarified that. Thank you.
And then for the fourth quarter note in 78, you want those to be separate?
Can I hear it separate? And then is it possible to do it more of like a bend? Or no? That would be great.
I can do that.
Yeah, the bend.
I'm just not sure if the slides are coming across, especially towards the end, like the last 2 notes that I played.
Yep.
Can you hear that?
Yep.
Okay.
It sounds very good. Oh, okay.
It's a boomy room and I have a boomy bass. So yeah.
It sounds very nice.
Okay.
Awesome. Well, I think what's really nice about this piece is that there is no right way to play it, even though I love the way you're interpreting this piece. It's not very technical aside from, the means and the bent notes versus the grace note plucks. But it's interesting whenever I approach a piece, the narrative is always delineated by some kind of movement for me. The music that I write tends to unfold very linearly. But what makes this piece unique for me is, in life, you'll go about your day, you're moving, you're doing things, but then you stumble upon certain moments. And for me, it could be, stumbling into a golden hour when the sun is just setting, or you walk outside and you smell the earth after a storm. That is a moment outside of time. And so for this piece, I wanted to convey that moment in time where time almost stands still. So when you're playing this, or when the listener is listening to it, you don't feel as though you're undergoing any type of movement. You're actually sitting still.
Interesting.
So I would encourage you to really explore that.
Yeah.
And that's what you're doing. But if you need to take your time between phrases, or if you play a note and you just want to let it linger until it dies out before you move on to the next gesture, feel free to do that. Because I don't feel like this piece wants to move. Yeah. I feel like this piece just wants to sit and contemplate. Yeah. So that's all I would have to say. But it's beautifully rendered.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you for writing such a cool piece. Yeah, it's really great. I definitely feel that with this piece of music. I like so again, man, the context is perfect. I'm practicing more than I think I've ever practiced before in my entire life, trying to get this audition together. And it's an insurmountable amount of music, but I have to do it because I really want to be employed.
Yeah.
And so my brain these last couple months has been going a billion miles an hour. And then working on this for the last couple weeks, it's I just in the process of working on it, I have to slow down and experience a little bit of what you're talking about, that contemplativeness, and just sort of slow down and just be in the piece for a little bit, and just yeah, it's I found that when I play this piece, it never feels like a practice session. You know what I mean? It's 30 minutes goes by like it's 2 minutes when I'm working on this. So yeah, it's really cool.
Well, hey, everybody.
Hello.
Hi, can you hear me all right?
Yep.
Yes.
Wow, so that was my first time watching that all the way through, and I'm just blown away. It's such a beautiful piece, and you just play it really beautifully, and I really, really loved hearing and getting you guys to watch you guys work together.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it was a pleasure.
Any takeaways from I guess seeing that again?
So I was talking about this piece with a friend of mine yesterday afternoon, and he asked me what is the piece about, and so I told him, it's about those contemplative moments that you have in life that sort of help you stop and take stock of things, and just be and exist without too much pressure on yourself to do anything at any given period of time. And to me, at least, that's what the piece sort of feels like to me. And I described it to him. I said it's a very energizing piece, even if it's not. like frenetic or having like a ton of like, moving like energy, so I thought that was something that sort of stuck with me throughout the day. And I thought, that might be a good way to describe it. It's a very energizing piece that like, it feels very much so oriented about the experience of playing it, in the moment. So, yeah.
Yeah. I love that. Like I love the concept of something that's like very still and grounding, and like through that presence like becomes really energizing. And yeah, especially like kind of coming out of COVID and like having so much time to just like sit and like be with ourselves and be with our instruments, like developing a new sort of like somatic relationship to the instrument where you can be very free and grounded at the same time. It's like really powerful. Sophia, I'd be really curious to hear you talk a little bit. Obviously, this piece is like very, I mean, not even just influenced by Indian classical music, but it is kind of directly pulling from that tradition. I'd be super curious if you're willing to hear you talk a little bit about that connection, about sort of how you brought that material into this piece, and what your background with that is.
Yeah, absolutely. It began, well, to give a little bit of my background and my introduction to Indian classical music, it began in 2016, my sophomore year of college, when I attended a concert with Pandit Rajiv Taranath. He's a famous sarod player, and Pandit Udiraj Karpur. He's a tabla player. And sitting in that concert and hearing the music that was performed, that was a monumental moment for me, because prior to that, I was trained in the Western classical tradition. And before college, I was also self-taught. So my primary framework of musical reference was the Western classical tradition. So my interest in Indian classical music was really piqued during that concert. And then throughout the remaining years of my time at Oberlin, I had taken an internalizing rhythms class with an American percussionist. His name is Jamie Haddad. And he used the Carnatic rhythmic system called Konakol. It's a rhythmic vocal system prevalent in South Indian classical music. And he used that system to construct his whole curriculum. And so I was in that environment for about a year. And so that's when my interest in Indian classical music was really piqued, because it was something I hadn't known before. And so upon graduating Oberlin, I knew that I did not want to go to graduate school immediately, but that I wanted to take a year to travel and conduct some ethnomusicological research that could inevitably influence my composition. And so I decided to apply for a Fulbright. And it just so happened that Pandit Udiraj Karpur, the tabla player who I had seen perform my sophomore year, after the concert, I had gotten his contact information. And so I was kind of in touch with him throughout the years. And so I told him that I wanted to apply for a Fulbright to study in India, because I wanted to study, the rhythmic systems, because they're some of the most ancient and some of the most sophisticated in the world. And so he agreed to, be my Fulbright teacher. I won the Fulbright, but because of COVID, it's been delayed for a year. But I've been studying with him virtually for the past year. So he's really been my primary source into Indian classical music, and North Indian classical music specifically, because that's what he specializes in. And North Indian classical music is also called Hindustani classical music. So I think because I've been immersed in that for the past year, a lot of the music that I've written within the past 12 to 14 months has been primarily influenced by the Hindustani classical style. So when I was approached to write a work for the double bass, I was like, oh, what could I potentially write? And since my studies with Pandit Udiraj Karpur are directly relevant to just my compositional and musical development at this time, I, had the idea to apply it to the double bass. And it was kind of an interesting challenge, because how do you merge an Indian classical aesthetic within a Western framework? And how do I take a musical tradition that is primarily an oral tradition, because in Indian classical traditions, they don't notate their music. It's all oral. It's all through memory and internalization. So how do I take this inherently oral, ancient musical tradition and translate it into Western notation? So it was both a challenge, but it was it was both a challenge and something that I wanted to do, something that really inspired me. So yeah, that's kind of the background to this piece.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. It's just amazing to hear you talk about your background with it. I mean, congrats on winning the Fulbright, and also it must have been
Thank you.
so infuriating to have that delayed. But I'm sure you're really excited to go.
Yes.
Are you going in the fall?
I'll be going January 2022.
Amazing.
So 7 months from now.
So cool. So then you kind of touched on this briefly, but I want to ask you a little more too, just sort of about the challenges of combining this very oral vocal tradition with an instrument like the double bass. Just have you had a lot of experience before writing for the bass? Do you know if there's any sort of precedent for presenting this this Hindustani style on the bass in this form? Is this kind of a totally new thing?
Well, I, prior to this project, was not familiar with any rendering of any kind of Hindustani classical piece on the double bass. And when I decided to pull primarily from the Hindustani classical tradition for this piece, the first thing that came to my mind is, where do I start? It's like I had absolutely no idea what I was going to write. Because prior to this project, I had never written for solo bass. A lot of my experience in writing for the double bass was within an orchestral setting. So writing for the double bass was really challenging for me because as a composer, I also consider myself a musical storyteller. There are stories that I want to tell. I don't just want to organize sound within time. I know that's a definition of music, sound organized within time. For me, I can't speak for everyone, but sound organized within time and music are two different things. Music for me has to communicate some kind of story. So for me, it's as a musical storyteller, I have more emotional narrative to work with within an orchestral setting because I have harmony, texture, orchestration that I can use to manipulate a certain narrative and to convey emotional nuance. What was difficult about the double bass is that it's a solo instrument and it's very transparent. So in my experience, asking me to write a piece for any solo instrument is like asking me to tell a story using only 10 words. The orchestra for me is like telling a story with the entire dictionary. But then writing for just a solo instrument, it's like, I want you to tell me a story using 10 words. It's much more limiting. For me as a composer, that's not to say that the double bass or any other solo instrument doesn't have an infinite vocabulary in and of themselves. But because I'm not a player of those instruments, I'm just not familiar with that vocabulary. So that was one of the challenges I faced approaching this project. And another one was, how do I write something that is both meaningful and translates well to the double bass? So having to merge those two ideas, it took a lot of research on my part of what exactly within the Hindustani classical tradition I wanted to convey in this piece, and just a lot of time to sit and contemplate what exactly I wanted to say, and then a lot of trial and error. And I think when I first approached this piece as well, going back to what I was saying earlier about me not knowing how I was going to write this piece, I really front loaded it with a lot of research. So it was very regimented, my process. I was researching different rags in Hindustani classical music, which are essentially musical frameworks. What musical framework did I want to use for this piece? And then just understanding the rules of the rags, because rags are musical frameworks that have certain rules. And when presented to an instrumentalist or a musician, the framework and the rules are fixed, but the performer has the freedom to embellish the framework however they want. So inevitably, the performer also becomes the composer. So there were a lot of technical things that I had to work through before I could really get into my creative process, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I'm curious to like ask Michael like how that was for you as like sort of encountering. I mean, I don't know if you have experience working within this style of music or in this genre, or if all of this, the improvisation and dealing with the Raag was completely new to you, and like how that was to encounter, and yeah, just sort of what that process looked like to realize this.
Yeah. Sorry, something Sophia said that, like really stuck with me. Being a performer and a composer in the same moment. Like I've never, I don't think I've ever thought of myself in that capacity. Maybe only I took an improvisation class at Northwestern where it it was like total like free improvisation, and I remember one morning we all walked into class, and the professor, he was like really tired. It was like 8 o'clock in the morning. It was like right before finals or something like that. And everybody was just totally fried. So he decided, like, you know what, we're not going to do a lecture like this class. We're just going to do like performance. And I didn't even bring my bass. So like I showed up, and, everybody showed up. A couple of the sax players decided that they would just play on the reeds or like their mouthpieces, like not actually their whole horn. Um, and like we all just decided like the only rule we were going to observe is just like reference what came before you in some way, like whether it's like the timbre of the sound, the actual notes that they played, the way that they played it, the way they took their breath before they played it or moved. And that was like one of the most freeing like musical experiences I think I've ever had. So there was, I definitely felt like that when I was performing this. I decided to not take very many liberties in the interlude sections. um, and looking back on that, I wish maybe I had done a little bit more of that. Or even in the final recording, I play it all pizzicato, but maybe I could see how another performance of this could utilize playing arco during some of those interlude sections as well. Um, yeah, it felt good to have the basis of the piece not being as strict as we're used to, in Western classical music, where if you don't play the notes on the page, you're not really playing the piece. I could again like imagine myself performing this in another setting where um, maybe I take more personal liberties with how I present like this piece while still adhering to the structure that's on the page. So yeah, I definitely found it to be very freeing and grounding at the same time.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love like hearing about that process for you. And then one other thing I sort of wanted to ask about is that I guess while you guys were working together, Sophia used a lot of like vocalizing and also the hand shapes. And I kind of wanted to ask about like just the relationship between this music and the bass and like vocalizing. Um, so if you think, I mean, I know as bass players, we talk all the time about like singing through the instrument, or especially in really traditional rap like Bottesini or stuff, we're always talking about like trying to find a more vocal quality. So I'm just curious, like, do you think of this piece, either both Mike and Sophia, to put this question out to both of you, is this vocal music? Is it not vocal music? Should it maybe be like perceived as vocal music? How are you thinking about sort of bringing that quality to the instrument or not?
Hmm. That's a really good question. And it's interesting that you asked that because when I sent Mike a recording of the score, I sang the whole thing. Because when I approached it, I always like approaching instruments as entities, beings that have an awareness, beings that are alive, because they bring music to life. And I like approaching instruments not as tools, but as voices. So when I was writing this piece, I actually sang it out before I notated it. So I was singing, I had the drone, and then I would sing an improvisation, and then I would notate it, and then sing. And if it felt right, I notated it. And then once it was all said and done, I sang the entire thing for Mike. And that's how he learned on the double bass. Because I imagined, when I did give it to Mike, I imagined that the bass was almost singing. the bass did have a voice. It wasn't just a dead tool used to produce sound frequencies. So just in terms of the connection between vocalizing and playing, it also translates, well, not vocalizing, singing and playing, it also translates into the recitation of rhythmic syllables as well, because during my studies this past year with Pandit Udiraj Karpur, in addition to learning the different elements and histories of Hindustani classical music, I'm also learning tabla performance with him. And one of the main principles in Indian classical music, North and South, is if you can speak it, you can play it. And so for a percussionist, you have to be able to speak the rhythm before you can play the rhythm on the drum. For an instrumentalist, you have to be able to sing the melody before you can play it on your instrument, because to sing or to recite implies the highest form of internalization that one can achieve, because the music is in your body, and I believe that's how it should be. So I really like the Indian philosophy when it comes to classical music, that it's more grounded in who you are. It's not something separate. Music isn't something you do. Music is something that you are. And so that's something that really attracted me to it. So I do believe that there is a connection between singing, rhythmic recitation, and one's ability to perform and really to get into the music and to be one with the music.
That's so interesting. I mean, I don't know, Rebecca, like what your background is, like where, like who you like started learning from initially. But for me, my first teacher, he's a Suzuki teacher, and I like when I started playing the bass, I could not read music very well. Like I couldn't read below the staff, and I couldn't read above like an F natural. Like to me, like that just didn't make any sense. And so I didn't know what a key signature was or whatever. And my teacher, he saw that I really liked the element of Suzuki learning, where you have to sing everything before you can play it, or at least you have to be able to like audiate it, and like make your musical ideas come out like vocally somehow. So that was sort of like that's sort of like where I come from with classical music, with like Western classical music. So I found this experience to be like really gratifying for me to be able to use some of that skill like here, and to sort of like to like sharpen it, to hone it, to like bring it out, to make. And I felt like it made my performance of this piece a little bit better than it would have otherwise been. Yeah, and I also think that like it's so important to do that with any kind of music, like whenever I teach people, that's one of the most important things, is being able to sing it in some way, even if it's like humming it kind of badly, or just being able to audiate it in your head. I think that's just super, super important. Something else that I wanted to say too is like, as I was preparing this, I couldn't help but think of how like jazz musicians like prepare a lot of the music that they play as well. And so much of it also comes from this oral tradition that you mentioned, like it's one person teaching another person a song, like on an instrument, not necessarily like a fixed piece of paper that says like, music on it. Yeah. And I also have like somewhat of a background doing that in high school. So I felt like it was really nice to connect with that. And yeah, it was really wonderful. So.
Well, awesome. It sounds beautiful. I can't wait to hear the final performance that you guys put together. And I'm just so, so happy to have this piece out there in the world as like another part of the bass repertoire that we all get to like study and learn and perform. I'm so excited to look at it myself and to hear like other performances of it. If there's anything else you guys want to add, any last words? Thank you so much to Sophia and to Michael for being here for this beautiful piece and for your performance of it. Yeah, really excited.
Yeah, well, the last thing that I want to say, it's been an absolute pleasure collaborating with bass players for Black composers, and, working with Mike in the rendering of this piece. So it's been an honor and a pleasure of mine. And yeah, I'm really happy to, hear the final performance tomorrow.
Yeah, and that's tomorrow. The premiere will be on YouTube at 7:30 Eastern time on our YouTube channel. So if you're watching this before then, check it out. If you're watching this after then, check it out anyhow.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's been a real privilege. So thank you.
All right, thank you.